Right, today we're going to have a road test of the Royal Enfield SHOTGUN 650, the final review, which will be the full review. I'm looking at probably next week, although I will try my best to get it done for this Friday. I just want to get a few more miles under my belt before I go ahead with that. Now, after that, if there's any sort of reoccurring questions, things that people absolutely need to know about this bike, I will at some stage upload a questions and answers video, because, invariably when you make these videos there are always questions that keep cropping up that haven't been covered in the review, so I thought that might be helpful. Now, I just want to be clear, this is the road test video. What I'll do is I'll put together a playlist for this bike. I'm saying that because people often start complaining that there aren't enough shots of the bike. I already covered those in the last video, so if you want some detailed close-ups of the bike, the last video is the one that you want to be watching. First of all, this is quite a heavy bike. You can see that on paper, but in reality, when you're handling it in parking spaces, that kind of thing, I was moving it around an awful lot to get these shots. It's a very easily manageable bike for someone of average strength. Even with a full tank of fuel, the centre of gravity is low, so the bike is very manageable. Now, seating position for the rider, this is a relative thing because anatomically we're all very different. It's a very sort of standard sit-up and beg riding position. I'm 6 feet tall, but I've got fairly short legs and quite long arms, and a long torso. The reach to the floor from a sitting position is fairly relaxed, very slight bend in my knees, which means manually paddling the bike around with your legs while you're sitting on it is reasonably easy and straightforward. You've got plenty of leverage. When you lift your feet up and put them on the foot pegs, it feels very natural. And I found that while riding it, my back was more or less straight, maybe leaning forward very slightly. Now, the reach to the bars might be a problem for some people. I'll try and sort of explain that to you. Normal riding, it's not a problem, but at junctions where you have to sort of set off and make, quite a sharp initial turn as you're setting off, I did feel once or twice as though I was reaching the limits of my arm length. For instance, if I was turning left, I did once or twice feel as though I was reaching the limit of my right arm in sort of continuing to hold the bar as I turned. There were only fleeting experiences, and I wouldn't say it was a problem, it was just noticeable. You sort of feel as though you've reached the end of your capabilities with your arm stretch. I think most people will get used to it, it's just an idiosyncrasy of the bike, but some people might benefit from some sort of risers. You would only need about an inch at the most. But once you're on the move, normal riding, it's no problem at all. Your arms are more or less straight, as you can see here. But on the whole, it's a very comfortable and relaxed sit-up and beg riding position. The controls all seem to be exactly the same as the Super Meteor, very ergonomic, everything falls to hand very easily. I need a little bit more time to assess the seat. It doesn't feel as well cushioned as other iterations of Royal Enfield seats that I've used. And obviously because you bolt upright, all your weight is transferred directly onto your backside, so it didn't feel quite as plush as other Royal Enfields that I've ridden. Now, that wasn't a problem, although the rear suspension, which I'll get onto in a few minutes, is quite stiff. So after an hour in the saddle, I did start to feel a little bit uncomfortable. It was very slight, nowhere near as bad as a BMW seat, but that was dependent on the speeds that you're travelling at, and I'll get onto that again when I deal with the suspension. Now, the rear view mirrors, on normal sort of riding stance, all you can really see are your elbows. You do have to sort of crane your neck to the left or the right to get a proper view of what's going on. I did actually adjust them several times and I couldn't get it any better. You are going to have to move your head and lean over slightly to get a clear view of what's behind you. But I think some sort of third party or accessory mirror is probably going to be the order of the day for most people. Just like any other bike, really. Footfall and position onto the gear changer and the rear brake all feels pretty average, very intuitive. Everything's where you expect it to be. Nothing unusual to report with those. And the gearbox is the usual Royal Enfield perfection. Nice, positive, tactile click gear changing up or down. One thing I have noticed is that when you release the clutch after a downward gear change, there does seem to be a bit of a delay with clutch disengagement. It might be the way the lever's set up. I will investigate that before the final review, because of course both the clutch and the front brake lever are adjustable. Again, I don't consider this to be a fault. You get used to other bikes. It's the first time that I'd ridden this bike. It just seemed as though you had to let the clutch out quite a long way before the gears bite. Yet there was no apparent lag when pulling the clutch lever in. It may just be down to my particular sort of technique. Again, I'll study that further and I will report on it in the final review. The gears seem very well spaced, although, and I know this is a gripe that I have about just about every motorcycle that I ride, I do feel that there are too many gears. It's a 6-speed box, and especially when you get on the twists and turns, you do feel that you're working the gearbox a little bit more than is necessary. Now, as you noticed as I came out of that junction there, the steering on this bike is very quick. So for the first few miles, as I got used to the character of this bike, I did find it had a tendency to oversteer slightly, especially when emerging from junctions, etc. at low speed. I'm used to riding Royal Enfield's much slower steering classic models. So once again, this is not a fault with the bike, this is more me having to adjust my riding strategy for a bike which is clearly set up on the sporty side. It was more a case of me putting more effort into the steering than this bike actually needs. The steering angle isn't as extreme as some sports bikes, so if you're riding one of these having just come off any of the myriad sports bikes that are on the market, you're probably not going to think that it's anything really to shout about. But certainly compared to the classics and of course the Super Meteor, this is a very quick handling bike, definitely a much sportier ride in the handling department. I think in my case it was the laid back riding position that sort of lured me into a false sense of security. It's not a sports bike obviously, but I would say it's set up as a sporty roadster. Because the riding position puts the weight of the rider quite far back, it means that the steering is very easy to turn, so you tend to sort of overturn it. In comparison, for instance, the Super Meteor steering rake is a little bit further out, it's more gradual. So over-enthusiastic handlebar turning won't provoke the same sort of reaction. I would say that the turn rate is actually quicker than the Interceptor. I can't remember the Continental GT, what that was like, but having said that, you had more weight over the front wheel on the Continental GT, so completely different bike. It's not an issue, it's just an observation. Right, so on to suspension. Of course, the front forks are upside down shower units. Very similar, if not exactly the same as those fitted to the Super Meteor. These are a major upgrade for Royal Enfield's front forks. I can't stress just how brilliant these upside down front forks are. Now, whether these front forks are set up exactly the same as those on the Super Meteor, I couldn't say. I suspect there's had to be a little bit of tweaking. Although, you know, that's just my opinion. This is a bike that is balanced very differently from the Super Meteor. They are an absolute pleasure. It's like a magic carpet ride up the front end with just enough feedback for you to know confidently what the front end is doing. These forks, like on the Super Meteor, are set up perfectly. It doesn't matter what speed you're going, fast or slow, it gobbles up the bumps with no sign of bottoming out on these less than perfect roads, which leaves the rider comfortable, safe and secure no matter what the road throws at you. This front suspension leaves you free to enjoy the ride without any worry of road imperfections upsetting the steering and the handling. They are absolutely spot on, but as usual when it comes to the rear shocks, it's a little bit more of a compromise. The rear shocks are pretty basic, and even on minimum preload with just one rider, it's a very stiff, sporty ride. Like a lot of rear suspension systems, this performs better over the speed of 40 miles an hour, so at normal cruising speeds, touring, whatever you're doing. Although they do feel firm, they keep the back wheel in touch with the road at all times, and they are pretty much spot on. It's at the lower speeds that things start to unravel a little bit. I think this is down to the damping and rebound rather than the spring rate itself, but it seems to transfer every shock and bump right up your spine at low speeds, certainly below 30 miles an hour. The bike still maintains impeccable handling, but it can feel a little bit jarring and uncomfortable. And that discomfort usually registers itself with a numb backside after about an hour travelling at low speeds. As I say, it's great once you get above 40 miles an hour travelling at normal sort of highway, A road, B road speeds. But this bike might be a little bit tedious to ride if you're just pottering about commuting on 30 mile an hour roads. Now, this is a common compromise with bikes around about the £10,000, £11,000 bracket. When you consider the price of this bike and the fact that it's only the rear suspension that exhibits this behaviour, actually it's a pretty good deal. You can learn to live with it. Of course, there are always some very good high quality rear suspension upgrades available on the market when a bike's been out for a few months. Some people might want to opt and go down that route. What I will say, this was a new bike with less than 500 miles on the clock. There is a possibility that they will soften up a little bit with wear at 1,000 or 2,000 miles, but it's impossible for me to predict that. It's a minor gripe which unfortunately manifests itself in most new bikes these days, but it will be fixable if you absolutely cannot live with it. Let's not forget, this bike is marketed as a customization platform, and it makes perfect sense that Royal Enfield have chosen to spend the money on the front end, knowing full well that your average owner is just going to change the back end as a matter of course. Right, braking. Front brake is great, just as you would expect on any modern motorcycle. Once again, as with the Super Meteor, the rear brake really surprised me. It's very keen. You know, we live in a world of ABS braking control, which means that most manufacturers weaken the braking effect of the rear brake so that you're not constantly provoking the ABS to kick in. So it's a bit of a shock when you ride a bike like this and the Super Meteor, where just a gentle prod of the rear brake creates a braking effect which at times actually seems keener than the front end. So All in all, absolutely no complaints with the braking system on this bike whatsoever. It's brilliant. Now, mesh all these characteristics together with Royal Enfield's well-respected, bulletproof, award-winning twin-cylinder 650cc air oil-cooled motor, and you've got a fantastic package. The engine is super smooth at just about any speed. Just under 50 brake horsepower isn't an awful lot nowadays, but it's more than enough on a motorcycle like this. Power delivery is very linear, which is what we've come to expect from Royal Enfields. There's more than enough torque for the bike to just potter along at 30 miles an hour in top speed, but when you need to open the throttle up, she'll show a clean pair of heels to most four-wheeled motor vehicles on the road. This is not a sports bike, and it's not a sports-oriented engine, but it has more than enough power to be exhilarating or even to get you into trouble if you're a bit silly. Fast acceleration out of a 30 mile an hour zone may require shifting down one cog into 5th gear, but either way, the bike will soon zip up to 60, 70 miles an hour or beyond in a short space of time that I think will be more than enough for most riders. Now, I found the Seat tyres on this bike to be very capable. You do get a little bit of squirming on white lines and some imperfections on road. I found that perfectly normal on just about every bike I've ever ridden. I know a lot of people like to make a big issue out of this. At the end of the day, it's just something that a two-wheeled vehicle does. If you absolutely cannot live with it, you can try swapping tyres and putting some different boots on, which might solve the problem for a while, or you can just get a car. It never felt as though the bike was unsettled in any way. It doesn't affect the handling, you just go with the flow, or as I've said, buy a car. All in all, this is a very sporty, capable all-rounder. It's a good motorcycle. Whether you just want something for the occasional commuting but mainly for weekend blasts, or whether you're someone who relies on your motorcycle and it's got to do absolutely everything for you, this bike will fulfill most roles with aplomb, in my opinion. All in all, it feels very safe, very precise. I think the word I'm looking for is tight. It's a very tight motorcycle package that does everything well, and like a lot of motorcycles, I'm sure it will be a very capable touring machine over long distances. Right, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I would also appreciate it if you would leave a like and subscribe to this channel if you're not already a subscriber. You can of course help the channel out in other ways, via my Patreon page or via the super thanks button down below. Either way is much appreciated. Now, as I promised at the beginning of this video, I will be getting some more miles on this bike, and I will be making a final sort of all-inclusive review on this motorcycle. Either way, I am going to be back on Friday, so until then, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.